This video is going to help you to understand how to manage your mind to stop you from worrying and stressing and live more freely. It's part 1 in a 7-part education series that I released to my private coaching clients. If this is the first time you're meeting me, my name's George Vernon. I'm a health and life coach for executives, business owners, and senior managers. I've got an extremely varied background in achieving optimal health, which started for me in a boxing gym well over 14 years ago. Over these past 14 years, I had 33 fights as an amateur boxer. I did an undergrad degree in sports and exercise science. I did my master's degree in strength and conditioning. I was a personal trainer on the gym floor for 7 years. I worked coaching elite athletes to optimal health for 4 years over the time I was doing my master's degree. I ran a fitness education business with my brother to qualify personal trainers. And now for the past few years have been solely focused on just coaching business owners, executives, and senior managers to guide them to being the best version of themselves by losing the weight that they want to and changing their health for life with the skills that I teach them. If from those 14 years of reading scientific journal articles, reading books, studying at university, working with people, I could only teach about one specific thing, it would be this: the answer to fulfillment, peace, and clarity, moving from ego to awareness. This is the first session in a 7-part series on bringing to the education lab. This session is going to be about introducing the topic, what it's all about. It's going to be broken down into 2 parts. So this first part will be that intro. The second part is going to be a very, very useful way of remembering things, because I know for myself that over the years I've forgotten so much of the good advice that I've been given. So I want to give you an actual tool and a method to remember things specific to you in your life, and you can obviously use it for absolutely anything in your professional life as well. Second session is going to be a real deep dive into the science of what I'm going on about when I'm talking about ego and awareness. The third session is actually specifically about training that awareness and incorporating that as habits into your day. Fourth session is deep into managing your body's stress, the science of tracking metrics, the habits you need to focus on, and actually how to break it all down so you understand it and you've got that skill for life. The fifth is then moving into the management of your brain. So you've probably heard me speak a lot at this point about your 6 psychological needs, just how the brain works. That is doing a really deep dive into actually understanding how that actually all functions so you can do something about it. The sixth session is going to be about being that awareness, so bringing that awareness day to day. And then finally, the 7th session is making it specific to you in your life using that memory tool that I've given you. So 7 sessions, really, really deep into how the brain essentially works and how we can use this to facilitate health. But I want to start off by properly introducing what I'm talking about. If you've heard of these terms before, if you're familiar with it, you might have an idea. But my purpose in this session is to sell you on why mindfulness, awareness is important and why it's actually worth your time. Because I know you don't have a lot of time, yet I know you're extremely stressed. So we definitely need to do something about that. And the way I'm going to sell it to you is I'm going to talk you through what it is, the mechanisms, a couple of stories of how I came to understand it, and most specifically how it's going to benefit your life and your health. But to begin with, so if you're unfamiliar with the terms mindfulness, meditation, awareness, it's all kind of the same thing. But I just want to be very, very clear. I come from a fighting background, as everybody in this program knows. I had 33 amateur fights, won central area belts as an amateur. This was genuinely my response to mindfulness when I first got introduced to it. I remember somebody briefly mentioning it in the gym. It literally was, what the fuck is meditation going to help, and why is that even useful to me? And when I first went to university to study sports and exercise science, I had a sports psychologist who mentioned it there. I didn't quite say that to them, but that's definitely what I thought. But despite having that attitude, because as I said, I was from you can kind of see from these pictures, tough boxing gym, because and with that attitude, it just didn't make any sense. However, at that time, I still had a little bit of a glimpse of what I now understand mindfulness to be. And this was me. I'm going to move the video out the way for you so you can see. But this was me all the way back in 2015. I ran that charity race dressed like that the whole way around as Santa, just to really give you some context of how definitely unmindful I was. I turned up to that event just to enjoy the race and run it with a couple of the boxing teammates that I had and the boxing coach. When I got to the start line, there was a gun and there was other people who looked like they were going to try and beat me. I took off like an absolute madman because I was like, no one's beating me. So what turned into a fun charity race, I ended up winning the race, 10k. It was in 39 minutes dressed like that. So yeah, that was definitely how unmindful I was at the time. I was training 2 to 3 times per day. I was around 5% body fat. And yeah, so I was pretty much the opposite of what I'm going to be talking about. However, as I said, I still, despite all of that, I had a glimpse at the time. And it was when my alarm went off at 6 a.m. for my usual run that I used to do before college. And I remember distinctively having this thought that if I listened to my brain and I listened to my thinking, I simply wouldn't have took action, because my brain was telling me not to go for the run, not to do, there's 3 sessions a day. My brain was constantly telling me to eat more. It was telling me to do pretty much the opposite of everything I was doing. So I remember genuinely thinking and genuinely trying to practice just not thinking to get what I needed done. So despite having no idea what meditation was for, despite thinking it was just a bit of a joke, I still had that little bit of a glimpse then, but that definitely didn't lead to me being enlightened, if you're ever familiar with the term. I'm going to really dive into the science of what that actually means, as opposed to the kind of spiritual woo-woo stuff around it. Because I ended up actually burning out about a year after that picture. I was obsessed with being the absolute best. I was obsessed with having to push myself to the max, feeling like I'd never done enough. It resulted in me burning out and taking a long period of time off boxing. So years then went by where I burnt out, started uni, all the rest of it, and I was kind of still stuck constantly in that cycle of thinking, constantly cycle of worrying, anxiety. And it wasn't again until 2020 when I was in a usual kind of spiral of anxiety and worry. It's just something that's always happened to me. I think it's been twofold in some ways. It's how you become successful, because you kind of stress all the time, but it's also what actually hinders most of your success. But I remember again having another thought in 2020, spiral of worry at the time. Can't remember what it was specifically about. I was doing my master's degree, a lot on at the time. And I remember just thinking that it's the same shit but a different time. So I remember having this thought that it's not really me worrying about anything in particular. The worries constantly changed over the years. I've just always worried about something. So it's this initial thought that actually maybe it isn't the outside world that's causing me to worry. Maybe I just worry as a default pattern. And that really stuck with me for a while, because I was thinking, well, if that's true, it's only I can influence me. I can't do anything about the outside world, because there seemed like there were lots of other people who never worried no matter what happened. So that kind of sent me into that spiral of thinking there, that it really, is it all just a pattern of thinking? Because if multiple people can experience the exact same thing, but respond in completely different ways, some will worry, some won't, is the worrying in the event, or is the worrying in the pattern of the way they think? And the truth is, I started moving into this because, as you can see, my obsession has always been with optimal health for me as a fighter. But then it's transitioned over the years, and I think everybody gets to that point in their life where it then transfers into just being the best and better than everyone else, and actually just finding happiness, fulfillment and purpose in life. And I was obviously working at that time in 2020 in a gym, I was also working with elite athletes, coaching other coaches to become personal trainers. So I was doing a lot, and I was really in this search of finding an answer to the problem that I was faced with. And that problem, maybe a lot of you can resonate, is constantly overthinking, constantly stressing, constantly being in a cycle of trying to escape your own thoughts, whether that's food, whether that's drink. And finding that answer for happiness and long-lasting fulfillment, and really how to manage life. So in 2020, finished my strength and conditioning master's degree. I genuinely kind of felt like I'd done as much learning as I needed to do at that point for the physical health, nutrition, all that kind of performance stuff. And I went 100 million miles an hour into psychology. Books, scientific journal articles, seminars, events, couple of day events, courses, you name it. I have literally thrown myself 100 million miles an hour at it for the past 5 years now. And a pattern that I spotted amongst everybody who was talking was that everybody says the same thing, just in a slightly different way. And this is the last story I'm going to tell, because this honestly really hammered it home for me. Because when I realised that, so as I said, I'm still doing psychology courses now. It's one of my favourite pieces of things to educate myself in, because it helps people so much and it helps myself so much. But it really hammered home when I started hearing common patterns. The best lecture I think I ever received in physical health was by a guy. He worked with Man City Football Club, UK Athletics. He was on the board of directors for sports performance in the UK. He now owns his own business, which the last time I spoke to him, I'm pretty sure he had millions and millions of pounds worth of shares in that. And he was talking about the idea of, is coaching a science or is it an art? And he broke it down really, really simply and said that we tend to call things art if we don't understand how to measure it. And what we can measure and in different ways and understand the variables in that, that's what we then call science. And he was saying that people call coaching an art of coaching because they just haven't worked out a way to properly map it and create the model for it. But he was showing us research about actually how models were really emerging, and actually we can measure it. So coaching must be a science, not an art. And the basis of that was all about first principles reasoning within the bracket of coaching science and helping other people and helping yourself as well. So it was the idea that we have real complex things. When they're complex and it seems chaotic and we don't understand it, we call it an art. We don't, because it's the easiest thing we can say. It's kind of art. If it's an art, it's almost like it's magical. Whereas we call it a science when we can break it down into first principles and understand each fundamental component. And when we understand each fundamental component, we've got the foundation to rebuild and really either help somebody, because we know what is at the bottom of what their problem is, so the actual root cause, and we know how to properly help ourselves. And that's what I genuinely saw with pretty much everything I was reading. There was a fundamental trend in what seemed like first principles of what everyone was saying, and then there was layers on top of that. And that's what this session is going to introduce, and this is what this 7-part series is really going to go through. It's going to go through the science of that, how most importantly, how you can use that in your life to live a happier, more fulfilled life. And the initial starting point that everybody speaks about, whether you speak to scientists, whether you speak to psychologists, whether you speak to coaches, whether you speak to spiritual teachers, all seems to stem from this thing called awareness. Now, the easiest way I've come to understand awareness is that you've got your thoughts and emotions, and what most people do is identify with those thoughts and emotions. They feel like it is genuinely them. It's probably more accurate to say that yes, the thoughts and emotions are occurring in you, but actually you are closer to the awareness that is able to observe them as opposed to being those thoughts and emotions. Because think of it like this: if you are your own thoughts and emotions, stop thinking for the next day. For 24 hours, do not think. And when you try that, and this is what happens for people when they meditate, you'll realise that thoughts and feelings are more so just happening repeatedly inside you, hardwired by evolution and your particular conditioning. And there was a famous quote that came from Descartes, where he was, again, using first principles reasoning to really think of to really understand the brain and to say, well, if I'm kind of my thoughts and feelings, they come and go, what can I know that is absolutely true? And he came up with a statement in 1637 that I think, therefore I am. But the interesting question I've heard asked to this, and I think it's so interesting, is that if it's you who's talking, why can't you stop thinking when you want to? So if it's you who's really in control. And also, if it's you who's talking, who's listening? And I think the more accurate way to look at this, from science, from just your own experience, which I'm really going to come on to in the training seminar, is that you're the observing awareness, therefore you have the capacity to think and feel. And when you shift from feeling like you are the thinking, the thoughts, and you're completely identified with them, and you shift it to this observing awareness, it puts you in the driver's seat. Now, when I first heard this concept, and some of you might be hearing this, and it goes one or two ways, and it's really interesting. Some people get it. Some people really are like, yes, because they've experienced it. Other people will try to intellectually understand this, and it just will not make any sense whatsoever. It definitely didn't make sense at all to me when I first heard it, which is why this 7-part series is going to be layered. And I'm going to come on to in a second what the science tells us when we train this, that actually improves and changes in your brain. But if you're at that place, don't worry. We're going to do tons of different things to help you experience that. And through that experience, you'll start to understand it and be able to practice it. And that's the most important thing. And I came to a place, and I know a lot of other people do when they first come through into these concepts, is that, thinking and feeling must then be a problem. Now, the problem is not your thoughts and feelings. It's that we completely believe them and that we aren't even aware that we're thinking and feeling. So we take it for complete reality. Which means, and you'll see this in spiritual traditions thousands of years old, that you're completely attached to your thoughts and feelings. And when you're in that place of being completely attached to your thoughts and feelings, you are unconsciously moving through life. You are overeating even though you don't want to. You are drinking too much alcohol even though you don't want to. You're not training even though you want to. You get unconsciously dragged through life by your own thinking and feeling, because you're taking it for truth, because you're completely identified with it, even though it's not real. And this is where we come on to the really simple equations of pain and suffering. And it slowly starts to make sense when we start to lay this in. So pain is when the world does not match our model of the world. So how we think life should be going is not how life is going. And that causes us psychological pain. Right, I'm not talking about physical pain like someone punching you in the face. I'm talking about psychological pain. So when we psychologically go into a negative state of emotion because what we think should happen does not happen. And then suffering is the exact same. So it's when the world doesn't match our model of the world, and we also feel powerless to change this. And this is where spiritual traditions and science and psychology agrees, is that suffer not because of the circumstances in our life, not because of what actually happens. We suffer because we constantly disagree with what's happening. We think it should be a different way. And this is why you get into you see it constantly in life, that so many different people can experience the same event, interpret it completely differently, and the result of that is massive on their health and on their life and just general happiness. And it's only when you then start looking at this and thinking, well, if you're not attached to your thoughts and feelings, and then you cultivate this skill of becoming the awareness and training that awareness, you can make different choices. It's also what I do as a coach. So what I do, and I'm going to come now onto the kind of intersect between spirituality, religions and science, but it's what I do when I coach you. I ask you questions and I challenge the beliefs that you have to make you think in a completely different way. And because you think in a completely different way, you take different actions. This is all about training you to have the ability to do that yourself. And yeah, as I've mentioned throughout, so the religious tradition, spirituality confirms, a lot of these teachings, and there's lots of intersects, which is really, really interesting amongst different traditions, which I find fascinating because they were practicing some of this stuff thousands and thousands of years ago. But as you all know, I've got a master's degree in science. My background is firmly rooted in scientific understanding. However, because I've got that master's degree in science, I then also know the limitations of science, and I'm more so here looking for truth and just really how to help people get better and experience things and just improve their lives. So what does science say about everything that I've said? Because the language I've used is probably more so towards the spiritual side of things in terms of how people interpret it. This is the technical terms for what science has found. So very, very similar to everything that I've said. And it basically says that we have our thoughts and feelings, and there's different, which are processes of the brain, and there are different processes of the brain that are then able to be aware of those thoughts and feelings. Metacognition is being aware of your own thinking, and interoception is being aware of your body. So those two things, they are channels into observing your own thinking, into experiencing and feeling your own body, instead of being completely identified with your thinking. When you know this, you'll get into a bit of a stressed out state. Your thoughts start running off with you. You get really stressed, you start worrying. Your body starts producing those emotions, and this happens kind of in split seconds. And then your feelings charge the thoughts charge the feelings, and you go into this spiral. And most people don't even realise, but they live life chronically like that, under stress all of the time. And these two, so metacognition and interoception, so metacognition, thinking about thinking, interoception, awareness of the body, are channels to observe those from a different place, and it gives you a completely different experience. And this is what I've now come to realise from all the psychology courses, from the reading that I've done, the scientific journal articles, the books, is that we've got it almost three-tiered, is how I like to view it. Is that we've got that observing awareness, so metacognition, interoception, so just awareness of thoughts and feelings. You've then got the needs of the body and the brain, which are the psychological needs. And then we've got your life experience. If you stay rooted in being able to observe and be aware of your thoughts and feelings, you can always make different decisions and shift yourself out of psychological pain and suffering. You can have coaches, you can have therapists that also guide you through that. For some people, that's absolutely necessary. Then we have the next tier up. As long as we're rooted in that and we constantly go back to that, you will live a far more happy and fulfilled life. But I'm not going to go into detail on what I mean by that and the science of that. I'm going to go into detail on that in the next session. The needs of the body and the brain is then meeting the needs of health. So that we know, and from science that and how the brain works, we function and we need particular things to be really healthy. So then you can't just be the awareness and then not do anything about anything else. You then want to then understand the patterns of how your body works and meet them, and then that completely influences your life experience. But as I said, I'm going to go into complete detail on all of that in the ego versus awareness. The thing that I wanted to finish off with here is the benefits of what I'm talking about. So if we practice this in meditation daily, if we practice mindfulness constantly, day to day, as much as we can, moment to moment, what are the actual benefits in our life? Well, the first thing that we know is training. So advanced meditators train this observing awareness and their brain physically changes. So an advanced meditator's brain on an fMRI scan functions completely differently to a non-meditator in the sense of what's active, what's not active, and basically the areas of the brain associated with self, with more negative states, reduce in activity, size, and density, and the parts of the brain associated with this awareness, with this clarity, focus, all these kind of things that I'm going to break down here, increase. So we physically know that as much as this is words, when practice, it actually has changes on the brain. And I like to see it as going to the gym for your mind. We speak constantly about going to the gym for our body, staying physically fit and healthy, but there's very few people I know that practice this kind of thing and take it as seriously, when the reality is doing this is probably more important than absolutely anything else. So what are the benefits? What do people see? So the first thing is that we see enhanced emotional regulation and stress management when you practice this over time and get good at this. We see improved decision making and cognitive flexibility. So because you're the awareness, you're not attached to the thoughts, you just have a better management of going with the flow of life. And then you can actually make better decisions because you're not so attached to things having to be a certain way. And then the same with emotional regulation and stress management. You're not completely engrossed in those thoughts and feelings. Because you can be aware of them, it actually changes how your body processes them, and it processes them in a far healthier way. You get increased self-awareness in the sense of you can then start monitoring your own behaviours and choosing actively what you want to do. It's like, for example, many of you will have experienced this through not overeating, through not drinking, through going to the gym even though you don't want to, and also authentic leadership. So rather than feeling like you constantly have to conform, because again, your mind runs off, your body runs off with thoughts and feelings, you can do it from a completely different place of monitoring your own thoughts and feelings and deciding what you want to respond with rather than react. It enhances interpersonal relationships and your empathy. So you are so much you're so much more present. So you're actually able to deeply connect with people as opposed to being lost in your own head. And with that naturally just comes empathy, because you actually see people in front of you instead of just concepts in your mind. Improve satisfaction and well-being. So this is what the scientific research says, and I'm going to show you the long list of journal articles that compiled these key pieces of information. So it improves life satisfaction and well-being overall. So this contributes to health massively, and I'm going to really dive into the health benefits. And then enhance creativity and problem solving. And you can even think of it just simply that if you're trying to solve a problem like you've always tried to solve it, so you're stuck in your own thinking, it limits you, it narrows you. Everybody in business here would have experienced that, but you solve problems like you do, and that's probably why you stay stuck. You need to solve a problem in a completely new way, and one of the best ways to find that new way is to be able to look at your own thoughts and feelings, and again, rather than reacting with them, choose how you want to respond. And those are the scientific journal articles. As I said, if this is your first time ever coming across any of these concepts, it's going to take some time to build in. They are the benefits. That is what you are going to get from committing yourself, committing your time to this. So the more you stick with this, the more your life will dramatically change. It's been the thing that I've found over the years, that if there's one thing out of everything I've learned about health and everything I've learned for myself that I would only talk about, it would be this.